everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman.
And I'm your host, Cindy Edwards.
And I'm your host, Martina Tam.
Yes, it's not just me anymore, everybody. I've got Cindy and Martina with me. We're bringing a new energy and a new vibe halfway through 2022 to Soul Focus Radio. Cindy, Martina, what do you all have to say about you joining up?
Well, I'm super excited to be joining you. I do want to say it's not a celebration that it's not just you. I enjoyed the podcast when it was just you too, Martin.
I appreciate that.
Super excited to be on here and to have conversations with you and our guests and connect with our listeners. So thanks for inviting us.
Yes, thank you. I'm really excited to be having conversations with both you, Martin, and Martina, and our future guest.
Yeah, I do appreciate you saying that, Martina, and I like doing it too. And to reflect what we do at Soul Focus Radio, everything we do is about growth. It's about change. It's about making sure that we're in line with a vibe that we really want to have, and that vibe is going to be a combination of different voices moving forward. Folks, you might hear my voice a little bit more at the beginning as Cindy and Martina get more comfortable in this role. You're going to get to meet them both later on. Both Cindy and Martina are going to have segments pretty much every week that they'll tell you more about. Once the actual podcast starts today, they'll each tell you about their podcast, and they'll tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they'll be doing on their segments and why they're excited. So that's what we have to offer you all. And as always, we love that you have chosen to be a part of our journey. So, Cindy and Martina, any last things you want to say before we get going?
Let's get going.
Yeah, I'm ready to rock and roll.
All right, let's do this.
Hi, Mahdi. Long time.
I know. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm doing good. It's so good to have y'all on this podcast, to have y'all voice and energy in this. I'm excited about it. Wow, boy. Yeah, man. You just, your energy, your different perspectives. I think this is like amazing to people get a chance to get a whiff of what you all bring. And I can't wait to hear it myself.
Well, thanks for saying that, Mahdi.
So we're going to jump in. Mahdi, we're very excited that you agreed to join us today. We just shared with everybody that Cindy and Martina are going to be co-hosts moving forward, and that there's always going to be some combination of the three of us. And sometimes you'll hear my voice more, and as Cindy and Martina get more comfortable, we'll hear their voices more. Sometimes it'll be just the two of them. So we just have a lot of opportunity to really explore. And having you as our first guest is just really natural.
Yeah, like I said, I'm so super excited to, hear Cindy's voice and Martina's voice and their perspective and their energy, the energy that they bring every day to their everyday life with, with their children, with your child, Martina, and Cindy with her kids. And just, you all's perspective on the world that we really need to see and hear from you, to get guidance from you, actually. So I hope you're ready to step in and give what you have to offer.
It's inspiring words, so we're going to do our best.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm still, getting used to finding my voice and, sharing my thoughts on and perspectives. I feel like I'm just always in listening mode and observing and, not really used to speaking much of my mind and being like in the forefront of self-focus. So I'm excited to share my perspective as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm so glad you said that, Cindy. So what we're going to be talking about today is the power of the mind. And, Mahdi, we thought you would be so natural to talk about it because it's a lot of what you talk about in coaching. It's a lot of what's at the root of Soul Focus Group. And I think, thinking about what Cindy just said, the thing that I love about this new format is that this is an opportunity for us to model what we do at Soul Focus Group, that we center growth. We always center growth, personal growth, collective growth, all together. And starting with how powerful our mind is in terms of confidence, in terms of where we belong, in terms of what our role is, what we should or shouldn't do. It's such a good starting point for this conversation.
Well, I'm super excited about the reboot because, you know, uh, I think it requires a different vibration, a different frequency that Cindy and Martina is going to bring. That's going to reach people that our voice wasn't able to reach, and so open to that happening because we are
Mm.
focused on impact more than anything. We want to have an impact. We just are not doing this just for the sake of doing it, but we want to impact people. And as it relates to the subject matter, the power of the mind, that's a deep subject, right? So I was thinking about when you mentioned the title or the subject,
Mhm.
first thing that came to my mind is the fact that everything you see is a result of the mind. Every manifestation, every physical manifestation that you see and put your hands on is the manifestation of somebody's mind. Then the second thing that came to my mind was the idea that we actually have more than one mind. We have a first mind. If anybody ever said that to you before, like follow your first mind, right? If you ever heard that before,
Mm-mm.
you never heard that before. I think maybe it's a generational thing. But when I was growing up, I would hear on a regular basis, follow your first mind, which meant to follow your intuition, follow your gut,
Mm.
trust yourself. You know,
Mhm.
that's what the older people were saying. And then I thought, well, if they're telling me to follow my first mind, then what's the second mind, right? Because if there's a first, there must be a second. And so the second mind
Mhm.
ends up being your ego. So our first mind is actually soul. That's why we say we are soul focused at the Soul Focus Group, because we follow our first mind and we don't lean toward our second mind. Now, the goal of mental power is actually to be able to create an ego that looks exactly like our first mind. So they marry to each other and become one mind. So, but the way the world is fixed today, because
Hmm.
our ego is something that's assigned to us by society, not like you go stand in line and get a card or something or a driver's license, but it's assigned through narratives, through stories, through the groundwater. So through the groundwater, we develop characters that becomes our ego. It's the world that told us to be these things. That mind is usually in contradiction to our first mind. In other words, our ego is usually not in harmony with our soul. Only when we assign or create an ego for ourselves can it be in harmony or in the image and likeness of our soul, which allows us to get back into the one mind, right? So that's the goal of actually a soul focus, is to support people getting back into having one mind as opposed to having two minds, because those two minds are often moving in two different directions. Your soul is moving one direction, your ego is moving in another. And that's the reason why we have ego reduction, because we want people to reduce the size of their ego so they can begin to see what their soul is trying to do for them, for their life. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I did want to say, Mahdi, that it may have been cultural too, because while you and I are of the same generation, I didn't grow up hearing that. It wasn't until a little bit later. I mean, I should say in my house. I did hear it in some of my, it was some of my neighbors, but those were in black homes. I didn't hear a lot of white homes talk about it. We used to say like, I'm of a mind to, like, that's the way my family spoke. Like, I'm
Mm,
of a mind to do this, or I'm of a mind to do that. But the idea of first mind and second mind was not something that was common,
mm.
other than when I spent time in the homes of my black friends. So it may have been cultural.
That's interesting. It probably was, and that was something that passed down from generation. 'Cause my great great grandmother, she was one foot in slavery and one foot out. So she was born in slavery, and by the time she reached adulthood, slavery had been abolished. But that was something, that concept was something that was taught to everybody, all the kids. Follow your first mind, because of course, living in a world, a dangerous world, like like it was during slavery and like it is still now. Learning to trust yourself, depending on your gut, is so essential to being able to lead your life in the direction your soul wants you to go.
Wow. That's beautiful. That's something that, I want to pass down to like my kids. Cause, I think in my generation, it's like follow your gut instincts, right? Follow your intuition, listen to your intuition. But I feel like those are along the lines of like your first mind and your second mind.
It is. I mean, when you say intuition, gut, uh, instinct, I think that's what they were really relating to. All those things are internal.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you learn to trust those things, then you're on the right path, because you have to trust yourself if you're going to be successful in this world. This is how we say it sometimes too, Cindy and Martina. We say you got to be 100% on your own side. Well, to get to be 100% on your own side requires you to follow your first mind, to trust your soul, to trust the components of your soul, which are intuition, gut, instincts. All these are components of our soul. In other words, expressions of our soul, how our soul relates to us and communicates with us. Martina, does any of this speak to you, or what part of it stands out for you?
Yeah, I think for me, what is really profound is I think I've often thought about abolishing the ego instead of marrying the first and second mind. And so I'm wondering if you have an example of what that looks like when your first and second mind are married.
That's a good question. All of the sages that we look up to are examples of what happens when you marry them, because the idea of all conflict with self is erased. We have been socialized to believe that we have to have contrast, that we have to have some type of conflict within ourselves. But the reality is that's not how it was originally designed. Life was originally designed so that we can be in harmony with ourselves. You imagine civilization wouldn't have lasted as long as it has if we were always in conflict with ourselves like we are now. If you look at the rate of destruction that we have brought to the planet because we're in conflict with ourselves, at this rate, if we would have always been like this, the planet would be gone. So what's happening now is that we're having to return back to the original state. And the original state was the world would give you an opportunity to get to know yourself, so you would tell the world who you are versus the world telling you who they want you to be. Carl Jung says it best when he says, the world will ask you who you are, and if you say you don't know, then the world will tell you who you are. And who the world tells you that you are becomes your ego. Well, when the world tells you who you are, that ego does not know your soul at all. So it doesn't work in harmony with it. But in ancient societies, they'd have a rites of passage where they would allow the child the opportunity to get to know themselves, and then the child would tell the community who they are.
Mahdi, I think the other thing I'm thinking about with your question, Martina, is that when you marry the two minds, then what's happening is you are really abolishing the ego, because the ego is all about
Yes,
separation. So alignment is all about soul. So once you've aligned the first and the second mind, you really have
Mm.
abolished the ego, because then the ego is what I heard
yes,
you say, Mahdi, is the ego is mirroring your first mind, not the other way around. So the
right.
marrying of the two would mean that you're at a higher spiritual plane, and that you're operating from that more soulful place all the time, or a majority of the time, where, as opposed to like kind of going back and forth between ego and soul, ego and soul. Mahdi, you said we had a trainer development session the other night. You said something really profound. It was very simple, and I probably heard versions of it from you before, but you said that a lot of times when people, coach with you, or other people that, do the work that you do, or they come to trainings, like in the moment when you're having the conversation, or you're at the workshop, or you're being coached, that people are really excited and into it and everything makes sense. But then a few hours later, or a day later, or a few days later, it's like you can't even remember that conversation or how you felt anymore. And that to me is a really good example of the soul, the first mind and the second mind not being married, because you have a hard time staying in the first mind, because the second mind always wants to take over and take you to the ego place.
Thank you for bringing it up too, Martin, because when we say something resonates with us, what we're saying
Mm,
is that
mm,
we can feel it in our first mind. it is in our first mind. It's resonating because it's ringing the bell in our first or original mind, right? And so then what happens is when you leave the process, when it's resonating with you, and you almost immediately go back to the second mind, and the second mind doesn't know at all what the first mind knows, unless they have been synchronized into one. The way it's talked about in the Bible is talked about, it says, and God created man in his own image and likeness. That is what our job is for our ego, is to create an ego in the image and likeness of our soul, so that it is one, not two. So we struggle because the world gives us an ego, which means the world gives us direction. The world tells us what to do. And for the most part, as long as our second mind is being driven by the world, we are being driven by the world.
What do you all think about that, Cindy and Martina?
What you were saying, Martin, of like being in the workshops of, you know, hearing this and that feeling that vibration. And that was like literally what I'm feeling is just hearing you, Mahdi. And it's been so long since we've talked. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing, because, you know, your presence, you always have so much wisdom to share. And I felt like that vibration in my body of that this resonates with me. And what's so interesting to me is, so something our listeners will learn about me is I practice acupuncture. And when you're looking for that feeling of chi in the body with the acupuncture, you are looking for a feeling of vibration in the body. And it was so interesting because I was just thinking how, wow, I'm feeling that just through kind of your words and your wisdom, and sharing your soulfulness. So just want to thank you for that, because just beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you for appreciating it. You know, because, you know, an instrument is only valuable if the people that the instrument is being played for can appreciate the music.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's deep for sure. I feel the same. I feel like every time I speak with you, Madi, or like listen to you speak, I'm always just like in awe. And like, when you said like, when somebody says something resonates with you, like that is because like your first mind had already thought that, or is, has some familiarity with that. Like that was powerful to me, because I'm like, I say that, but then to hear you say, because it sides with like your first mind, that was just really powerful for me.
You know, the term common sense is connected to first mind. So when people say, you got to have common sense, they're saying, once again, that's another way of saying you follow your first mind. There's so many little things that we've been taught that about the first mind, but the world just keeps us distracted from it, because in first mind, all of the decisions that we make are always in our favor. You know, so we say everything is working in our favor, but we have to too. So everything in the universe is already working in our favor. That becomes real for us when we start working in our favor.
And I think that resonates so much with what you were saying earlier about how we're treating the planet, Mahdi, is that we're not, as a society, as a world, working in our favor when we're destroying the planet we depend on. And how crazy is that?
That's all of that is linked to our secret perception of ourselves. Like how we secretly see ourselves is the way we relate to ourselves, and therefore relate to other people and relate to the planet. We have our view of ourselves is so corrupt, not who we are, but the view we have of ourselves. We've been given so much of a faulty view of ourselves that we have taken the faulty view for who we really are, and thus we are constantly in conflict with ourselves, because not because we're in conflict with who we are, we're in conflict about what we were told to believe we are. So our second mind told us who we were, and it's not correct at all. And we're going to stay at odds with ourselves until we get back to our original version.
Everything is connected, right? Everything.
Yes.
And we're taught, all right, this ego-based world tells us that we're separate. And we've lost the ability to see ourselves in each other. We've lost our ability to see ourselves in the planet in us. And the good news is it's something that we can regain. And that's what, to me, the soul focused way is all about. What we talk about with soul focused is a return to connection, a return to self solidarity, a return to human solidarity. And that is directly linked to the power of the mind.
Yes. All of this that we're talking about is definitely the power of the mind. We haven't even begun to experience what our minds can truly do because we've been operating out of two different minds. So in our lives, if we take an inventory, you will see there are some things and decisions that you've made that were in alignment with your first mind. And you will find that you are totally in harmony with those things. But then you will see there are some decisions and choices that you made from your second mind, and you will see that you're in conflict with it. One of the biggest problems that we have is that we want something and then we get what we want, but then we don't want it after we get it, which is a good example of evidence of what happens when our second mind wants something. We go after it, we get it, and we don't want it, and it produces so much waste in the world. There's waste in relationships, waste in other aspects of our lives where we are wasting things because we think we want it because our ego wants it. But the thing is, our ego is insatiable. Whatever it wants, it will always want, or it will want at a deeper level, and it will never get filled. It will be like a bucket with a big hole in it. The more you pour water in it, the faster empty it gets. So nothing you do out of ego will fulfill you. Nothing. Nothing out of the second mind fulfills us. Nothing.
Well, Mahdi, that is a great note for us to close out this part of the conversation. So just know, listeners, and Cindy and Martina and Mahdi, that we're going to be continuing this conversation with Mahdi and with other folks. And this, I won't say it's the beginning, I'll say it's a continuation, but it's the beginning of many of these
Yes.
conversations with all of our voices, our combinations of our voices as a part of it.
Thank y'all for having me on the show, Cindy, Martina, Martin. I really appreciate being able to be the first with you all jumping on. So I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the explosion that's going to happen from you all's energy.
Hi, everybody. This is Martina again. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself and introduce you to the segment I'll be doing. I don't have a name for it yet, so I'm open to suggestions if folks can send in ideas for a good title. But wanted to introduce myself a little bit. So, like I said, my name's Martina. I'm calling in from Tacoma, Washington, just a little bit south of Seattle. And I am living here with my partner and our 7-month-old daughter, Makeba, who is just the absolute center of my life. And then on the side, I'm a family physician for the Puyallup tribe of Indians down here. And, I'm hoping to talk with you all moving forward about each of our soul-focused topics and how it relates to our bodies, to our health, and even our healthcare system and the dysfunction that we have within it. So today I was hoping to talk with you all a little bit about the power of the mind and how that relates to our health, and specifically how we can see that with the placebo effect. Cindy and Martin, I'm curious, how much do you heard about or thought about the placebo effect?
Oh, great question, Martina. I've actually thought about it a lot, a whole lot. Yeah, I remember learning about it when I was pretty young, and I was kind of fascinated by the idea of, these clinical studies where they would, give one group of people like sugar pills, and they would give one group of people a quote unquote actual pill. And it was always fascinating to me to look at the results and see oftentimes that the placebo, was almost as effective, maybe even as effective. I don't know if I remember seeing it more effective, but I love the concept, and I've been fascinated with it since I was pretty young.
Yeah, I remember learning about that as well too. And
Well, it's so interesting. So in medicine, when you do studies, there's the placebo and then there's the quote unquote real drug. And if there's no statistical significant difference between the placebo and the real drug, then they say, okay, this real drug doesn't work. It won't get FDA approved. And something that I've been thinking about with the power of the mind is how do we flip that mentality and say, well, actually, what this suggests is that whatever we're trying to treat is actually related to our mind and that power of our mind to affect our bodies and our health. And there's some really fascinating studies. So there's a study where they had people take a Parkinson's drug, and then after 5 days, they switched them to placebo. And the patients knew they were being switched to placebo, and they continue to feel the effect of the drug, and they continue to see the chemical and neurologic changes on brain imaging and blood tests as when the patient was taking the Parkinson drug. And so to me, that was like mind blowing because it shows this capacity for our brain and our mind to heal ourselves. And something like Mahdi was talking about is we have to stop relying on other people and on the world to tell us who we are. I think it can be reflected in medicine. We've become so reliant on pills and this act of taking a pill to heal ourselves when a lot of the time, I would say probably the majority of the time, the power to heal ourselves is in our mind. And we can actually even see that on a chemical level and on a brain imaging level, which to me was mind blowing.
Yeah, it really is. So do you question the policy then of a drug's efficacy based on it being more effective than placebo? Because it sounds like what you're saying is that the drug might still be effective and the mind is also effective.
Exactly. And gosh, when a placebo is statistically as effective as a drug, should we then start thinking, okay, maybe we don't need a drug for this and we need to teach our minds how to heal from this? And that totally flips the way our medical system works. It flips the way that, what I do as a doctor so often is prescribe a pill. And there's some theories about why the placebo effect works with pills. It's that we have been conditioned that our ritual of healing is taking a pill. And so, what other rituals can we create? And if you look back at a lot of indigenous communities and traditional medicines, there's so many rituals involved in healing. And now our ritual is taking a pill. So I think there's so many layers to that and really highlights in this, whatever we want to consider quote unquote scientific way, the power of the mind to heal ourselves and to make ourselves sick.
Yeah. Well, like with that, I'm just like thinking, so like my mom, she's retired. She's like a lot older. And obviously, with the economy right now and inflation, like the stock market is like crazy, right? And my mom is like just constantly like worried about, like her portfolio to where it's like affecting her health. Like she is so stressed to where she is physically not starting not to feel well. And, like, I always tell her, I'm just like, "Mom, like, you worry so much and, like, you stress so much, and, like, that is so bad for your health." Like, so just thinking about, like, the mind and how it can make yourself physically sick too, like you said, it can heal yourself or make you sick. Like, that was, like, a thought that was relevant for me because I was just talking to my mom about that, and she's just always like, "Oh, I have a headache, I can't sleep. I'm so tired." And I think I just right there, that was something that I found was really powerful. Your mind can also make you sick too.
Yeah. Cindy, thank you for sharing about your mom. And sorry that she's feeling that stress. And I think, so many people have been, especially these last few years. And so much of when we go to a doctor, like I just feel like I wasn't prepared with my training in medical school and residency to really meaningfully help people through stress. And I think we've lost a lot of those ancient tools that our societies, our cultures, our families had, or I'll say I have. I don't know for others, but I have lost those tools. And so, really actively trying to reconnect with those. And I think a big part of it is having these conversations on the Soul Focus podcast, learning from each other and relearning and reconnecting with old traditions, creating new traditions for us to be in tune with our first mind.
Beautiful. Man, awesome first segment, Martina. That was really good.
Thank you both for talking with me
Absolutely.
and
That's,
sharing.
yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Hey everyone, it's me again, Cindy Edwards, and I am joined by my co-host, Martin. Hey Martin.
Hey, Cindy. I'm so excited to be a part of your new segment. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks for being on. I'm really excited to, introduce myself so that our
Yes.
listeners have an idea of, who I am and what I do. And then, we'll get going with my segment here. All right.
Awesome. I'm excited. Yep. Let's go.
Okay. So, hi everyone. I am the executive assistant and design coordinator for the Soul Focus Group. I'm also involved in some of the day-to-day operations for my husband's company, Local Hoops, which is a basketball training academy based here in Bellevue, Washington. Aside from my professional life, I am a mother to 3 young children who are 2, 3, and 6. So my segment will be pertaining to parenting and how it relates to the topic of our podcast. And in this case, it's the power of the mind. So yeah, this is where we'll start off with. And yeah, Martin, did you want to say anything before I dive deeper into this?
No, I just want to tell you, that I'm really excited that you're doing this, Cindy. I mean, I think this is a great topic that our listeners are going to really find interesting. And, we can just tell them now that as we move forward, we're going to make this interactive. So they'll be able to ask you parenting questions and we'll be able to answer you'll be able to answer through the lens of the Soul Focus Group and how you are trying to do soul focused parenting and how we can share that message with everybody. So yeah, I'm just really excited and, I'm looking forward to what you have to say today.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So the power of the mind. For me, the power of the mind is a tool that I'm still, discovering and working on to unleash in a way that is beneficial to me, and how I react to situations on a day-to-day basis, especially with my children. I read something the other day that really stood out to me, and it said, thoughts are energy. Although subtle and invisible, they can affect your reality. So I thought it'd be perfect, to like share a story with you, Martin, of something that happened to me like last month when I was out at dinner
Yeah.
with the kids. I was able to relate that to, what I read. So, the other day, well, last month actually, we were at dinner and it was just me and the 3 kids. This was after KJ's basketball practice and Kelly was still working. Kamani, he wanted a soda. And, I told them that we were only drinking water because it was very close to dinner time. And he just got so upset. Like he literally like fell out. And, the thing with Kamani is he's a very passionate kid. So when he feels something, like he feels it deeply. So, like we were in the restaurant and he was just getting progressively angrier and like angrier. And he started to like yell while he was crying. And, in that moment, I felt myself getting really embarrassed, like really, really embarrassed. And, this made me think about, what Mahdi was saying earlier, like your second mind. That's like your ego where you're just so embarrassed or, just you're worrying about what other people are thinking about you. And like in that moment, literally everyone was like staring at us in the restaurant. And I'm just like thinking like, oh my God, these people are like, just think that I have no control over my own like children. And they're just, feeling like I'm disturbing their, their peace and like their dining experience. And I was just like, I felt myself getting really upset because no matter what I said, come on, he wouldn't calm down. Like he wouldn't stop crying. So I just, with that, I felt like I had to step away, and I needed a moment to like recompose myself, because I was feeling just like really angry, and I felt like I shouldn't have been angry, but in the moment it's so hard to like control, your emotions, especially when you're starting to get like flustered from like, your children crying or something. And so, in order to recompose myself, I needed to like recompose my thoughts. And that's why I feel like that's where the power of the mind comes in, because, thoughts are what's running in your mind. And so, in that moment, I had to like think of a way to try to calm down. And so I was trying to replace like the negative thoughts that I was having towards Kamani, like, oh my God, I can't believe he's like lashing out. And, I just had to find a way to replace that negative thought with the thought that made me feel a little bit better, or something that would be beneficial or helpful to the situation. And, so then I started to think like, Kamani right now doesn't have the skills to cope with this disappointment in the moment. And, I can see how it can be very hard to be told no, and you can't have something that you really want, because me as an adult, like I've felt that frustration, to want something and not be able to get it. And yeah, I feel like the power of the mind, like helping reshape my thoughts, helped me come back to like my first mind, right? Like my
Right.
loving self. And so, it helped me approach Kamani with grace and acceptance, even though like his behaviors and his actions at the time were like very undesirable. Like I was able to approach him with grace and, just like give him a hug and love on him and explain to him like, I'm sorry. I can see how upsetting this is for you. And, eventually, like I was able to calm him down by just showing him like compassion. I think that's just what he wanted, is to feel understood, and that connection that like, between me and him.
And he did while you were still there. So like you were able to get your composure back and then help him get his composure back, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Cindy, I got to say that's such a powerful story, like for real, because a couple things. Like, I mean, you really did lay out. It's a perfect story to talk about like the negative impact of the ego, right? So ego is outside in thinking. So you're thinking from the outside in at the beginning of your story. Oh my God, what are they thinking about me? Right? Like, I'm so embarrassed, I'm mortified. I'm like, all of these different concepts, right? That's what was going on for you, right? You were thinking, you were focusing on outside in. What are they thinking about me? Right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. What the ego does is immediately takes it to the negative. What positive might they have been, some of the parents in there, or some of the people in there? What are some of the positive things they might have been thinking about you?
I guess coming from a place of compassion, they could have been thinking like, wow, she has 3 young children to care for. And, I can see how difficult that may be. A lot of, parents understand how difficult it can be. But I think for some people who are not parents, it might be a different perspective, where they may feel like, well, I guess now I'm going back to the negative, but where they may feel like, oh,
Yeah, yes, you did.
this girl can't control her children, or, whatever.
Yes. it's a good moment to just pause. I think for you and for all of our listeners to just pause for a minute. And I know I do this myself all the time. The default is to the negative because that's how we've been programmed. That's how, we've come to think through an egoic lens, is to always focus on the negative. So I was noticing, I'm glad you noticed it, because I was noticing that you shifted and he's like, oh yeah, a couple people might've been thinking that, or one or two parents might've, but then what would the people that aren't parents thinking? We just don't know. And
Yeah.
the thing is what the ego does is it automatically writes a negative story, which feeds into a negativity about ourselves. And that's your default. The funny thing is the second mind is the first place we go,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Our default is actually our ego, our second mind. And then what you talk about is regaining composure for yourself first, which reminds me of the old saying, right? Or, the thing they tell you on airplanes is that, put on your mask before you put on the mask of your child, right? So
Right.
you have to make sure you're good before you can help, your child. If there's an oxygen emergency in an airplane, they always say, put on your mask first. And that's what you did. Composure, like the COM, I love words, Cindy, and COM at the beginning of a word means like to bring together, right? So composure is really like bringing yourself together. It's like recomposure is bringing yourself back. And what you're bringing yourself back to, like you said, is that loving, first mind, soulful parent that you are at your core. And I think that's why it's such a powerful story, because whether we're parents or not, this is a place we go to all the time. And I think a great exercise for all of us is the next time something like that happens, as quickly as possible, start to feel positive energy from the people around you. Oh my gosh, I've been through that before too. Oh, I feel bad for her because she's been through this. She must be feeling, you know what I mean? There are probably a lot of really positive thoughts that are happening. Instead of imagining the negative ones, what would it feel like to imagine that everybody in the restaurant is supportive of you and wants you to be able to get, it's Kamani, right? I'm
Come
sorry.
on, yeah.
Yeah, Kamani. I know a Kamanti in my life. So Kamani, bringing Kamani back to his first mind and to his calmness, his place of calmness and composure. And what would it feel like to start as early as possible, imagining that everybody in that restaurant wants you to help him get back to where he's not yelling and screaming, as in a positive way,
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. Like, I've never thought
Yeah.
about it like that. Even though, like, if I was in a restaurant and somebody's child were to have a tantrum or a meltdown, like, I feel like I would be feeling those things like, oh my God, like,
Yes.
that must be so tough for her. And
Yes.
I would be coming from a place of compassion to other people. But for some reason, to myself, like you said, the ego, the second mind takes over. And then, of course, I'm thinking of just like the worst scenario possible. But that's definitely a great, like, shift in perspective. And I'm going to try that next time. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. Imagine a room full of yous, because you would be empathizing and you would be compassionate and you would be sending love to that person who's going through it. So just imagine that everybody there is coming from that same place that you would come from. It's just so interesting when we talk about the power of the mind, is how that we tap into the negative power of the mind more than we tap into the positive power of the mind, and I think this is such a great example of that. And I so appreciate you sharing that with me and with our listeners.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate, all your kind words and your wisdom as well. And I appreciate all of our listeners. Thank you for being on this journey with me, with this new segment. I'm definitely going to share my highs and my lows. And I'm just really excited. I feel like I'm building like a community of, soul-focused parents and non-parents. Just, I'm excited to share this journey with everybody.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this first one, Cindy. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. And I want to thank you, to all of our listeners, for listening to me on this first segment. And I'm excited to talk to you on our next podcast.
was awesome. That was so cool. That was such a great way for us to start. What do you all think?
I just always feel like uplifted when I get to talk with Mahdi and hear his wisdom. So yeah, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, and I feel really good, like you said, Martina, like the vibrations running through me, and I'm just hoping that, the same goes for like our listeners too.
That's that's awesome. Yeah, that's how I always feel when I talk to my D2. And just to echo what we talked a little bit about during the episode, during the part of the episode where we talked to my D, is that it's our job, Cindy, Martina, and me, and it's all of our listeners' job to maintain that vibration. One of the things my D will tell you is like he is bringing knowledge that really all of us have. He's really bringing what we already know out of us. And so part of our work, quote unquote, or our practice, or our job, however you want to say it, is that we find those vibrations in ourselves, that we don't have to rely on anybody externally ever to bring that to us. But that's so we don't lose it and go like, oh, I wish I felt like I did when I talked to my D that time. It's really part of our practice has to be finding that vibrational level in ourselves.
Absolutely.
So this is it for our first episode. How did it feel, you all? How did it feel to do this first episode?
It felt great. I think Mahdi's such a good first guest to have because we know him and he's just so easy to talk to and so I think inspiring and encouraging. And so it felt for me like it was pretty easy for the conversation to flow.
Same, yeah. I think, like you said, like don't get all up in your head. Like before recording, I was really nervous and wasn't really sure where the conversation was going to take us, but I felt like it was just so natural and I just felt comfortable, and like I feel like the more I listen to Madi talk, like you said, Martina, like there's that level of familiarity with Madi. I just like I'm more loose, instead of feeling like tense because I was like up in my head. Yeah, I'm really excited to continue to have these conversations and, just let it flow.
Awesome. And I think what you both said is why you both are going to be really good at this. And I think it's incredible. I can't wait to just watch you all grow into it. And the vibrations that you both bring are very powerful vibrations too. I really enjoyed listening to you all. In addition to listening to my D, which I always like, but I really like listening to you all, and I really like listening to you all interact with my D. So I really want to thank you both for making the decision to be on this journey with me. I really do. I really appreciate you both.
Thank you, Martin. I appreciate you a lot.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual.
Awesome. Awesome. And our Soul Focus Radio listeners, we appreciate each and every one of you. We appreciate you and we love you. And we're so excited that you all make the decision to come on this journey with us and that you've made the decision to come on this new journey with us. We really, really appreciate that. And we just want to tell you to come check out all of our social media, soulfocusgroup.com on Instagram, on Facebook, Soul Focus Radio on YouTube. We want you to like us, to subscribe, to follow us, and to share. We really want you to share. We know that you love us. We know that you're our regular listeners, and we want you to help us grow, especially now that we are bringing this new energy. So we just want to say to everybody, we want you to stay safe, stay well, and most of all, stay
Soul focused.